My name is Charles Mohrle. I was a World War II fighter pilot. Flew in England and France. I flew a P-47 Thunderbolt. This airplane had an 18-cylinder, 2,000 horsepower engine in it. It had 4 50 caliber machine guns in each wing, so a total of 8 guns. Under each wing on that pylon, we could hang as much as a 1,000-pound bomb, a 500-pound one on the belly, and in the wings we carried 4,000 rounds of armor-piercing incendiary 50 caliber bullets like that. One of these things will go all the way through an automobile, including the engine, and start a fire. When you squeeze the trigger to fire the guns, all 8 guns fired at once, and you put out 96 of those a second. Something in front of you is going to get hurt real bad. There's a railroad on the ground down there with a train on the tracks. Right there is the engine. Those little white spots you see right in the cab of the engine, that's where bullets from all 8 of my guns came to a point, and the thing is beginning to explode. It's unlikely that anyone survived that. When I fired that burst, I'm coming at it out here about 500 feet above the ground at 300 miles an hour. That's 250 yards in front of my airplane, and all it took to blow that engine up wasn't even a 1-second burst. It's like, and it's all over. That's the remains of a German marshalling yard. They brought these boxcars in, loaded them up, hooked an engine to them, took them out. This photograph was taken by a very low-flying P-38 photo recon airplane 4 hours after we went by and dive bombed the place. Let me explain dive bombing the way we did it. This airplane, the P-47, was the biggest, heaviest fighter of World War II. When you got the nose down on it, the acceleration was extreme. Tech orders warned you, never start a dive below 8,000 feet and dive at a 45-degree angle. 8,000 feet is almost 2 miles up, and you drop a bomb 2 miles up at an angle like that, and you have no idea where it's going to hit the ground. So our squadron commander, Major Ralph Jenkins, experimented around and came up with this idea. Assume that the point of that bullet is the target. We would fly toward the target not at 8,000 feet, but at 5,000. You rolled on your back like that and went right straight down. Adjust your dive to get the dot of your gun sight on the target, release the bombs, and then pulled out of the dive going back this way. We would be down about 700 feet at 400 miles an hour. That low and that fast, you're hard to hit. So we didn't lose anybody down here, and we also never had one fly into the target. But the accuracy of our attacks improved to where it was not unusual to see a guy roll on his back and dive down and a pair of bombs straddle a German tank like that. This is also what we would do. That's what's left of a German troop train carrying soldiers. There isn't much left. These boxcars were a steel frame with wood siding and top on them. We would hang a 100-gallon tank of gasoline on the belly of our airplane, fly about 50 feet over the top of it and drop the tank on it. It would burst and splatter gasoline all over that wooden boxcar, and the following fighter would shoot it, set it on fire. It just burned everything up. This is an interesting photograph. That's a picture of the 510th Fighter Squadron that I flew with, assembled for takeoff June 6, 1944. That's D-Day morning. There are 12 P-47s in that picture, and we could get all 12 of them in the air in about 3 to 3.5 minutes. This was the airfield we flew off of in England, on the south coast of England. This is the shoreline, the white cliffs. There is the runway. The tech orders for a P-47 called for a minimum of 5,000 feet of concrete paved runway. That's 4,500 feet of wire mesh. There's your airfield, fellas. This is the little village of Muddyford. One day, 2 of my pilot buddies and I were walking right down here, and watching one of the other squadrons in the group take off, and one of their planes got up about there and the engine quit. He went down, hit the top of a house, crashed in there, and burst into flame. Well, the neighbors around there did what people anywhere would do. They all came running down to look at the wreck. We knew there were 3 500-pound bombs in that fire. So we were running down there to warn the people and chase them away. We got about, 75 or 100 feet away from the fire. One of those bombs cooked off. The guy next to me, Arthur Williams, was from Kansas. He was about arm's length away, and a piece of shrapnel, scrap metal about so big, hit him in the chest and went right through. He was killed right there. The guy on the other side of me had a piece of shrapnel hit his ear, and it took a hunk of his ear out. He recently retired as President Emeritus of the South Carolina Senate, Senator John Drummond. I didn't get badly hurt. I got skinned up a little bit, but was introduced to the concussion from an explosion like that. There were 21 people killed there, and I'm walking around in the middle of that carnage with no idea where I was or what in the world I was doing. After the Normandy invasion, our fighter group moved across the English Channel to France. We didn't have fancy living quarters. You did your bathing and shaving out of your steel helmet. We've got some water heating in a bucket back here on an open fire. That's pretty primitive living. This is also how we lived. A couple of my buddies, Sandy Johnston's getting a new hairdo, and Eddie Widdowson that's doing the barbering. Wasn't a barber, he was a florist when he got in the service. Didn't matter, he's just chopping hair off. We lived in the tents you see scattered in the trees. There's someone's laundry hanging on a tree branch back there. Pretty primitive. One day Sergeant Singh came to me and he said, "Captain, would you do me a favor?" "Well, sure, Sarge, whatever you want." On the wings, on the pylons, under the wings of this airplane, these things, we hung bombs. We could also hang external fuel tanks to extend the range of the airplane. One type of those tanks were made by the English. They held 108 gallons and were made of paper mache, which was liquid proof for maybe 3 hours. Sergeant Singh mixed up 70 gallons of powdered milk, dumped in 20 gallons of mixed fruit cocktail, 25 pounds of sugar, 3 gallons of cavados, a good tasting apple brandy they made in that orchard country, a few other spices. Got it all mixed up real good, poured it in one of those paper tanks, hung it on my airplane, and said, "Now take that up where it really gets cold." So I took off and climbed up to 35,000 feet, where the outside air temperature is 45 to 50 degrees below zero. It's going to freeze that mixture pretty quick. Slopped the plane around like that about a half hour to try to keep it stirred up, rolled over and dived down and landed. They dropped the tank from the wing, chopped it open with an axe, and we enjoyed tutti frutti ice cream. Now the Germans are trapped between Montgomery and Bradley, and they got out of their headquarters were at St. Lo. They got out of there on a road to try to escape from that pocket. We didn't know they were moving, and we took off just at dawn, flew a search pattern, and came across that German column, bumper to bumper enemy traffic as far as you could see. Turned and flew up to the head of the column, dropped a bomb on the lead tank and stopped them. Called our squadron and told them what we'd found. Squadron reported to the group, and the group sicked the other 2 squadrons on that German column. That's 36 P-47s pounced on them and created the wildest sky you could imagine. Anti-aircraft coming up all over the place, fires and explosions all up and down the road, airplanes coming in from every direction. The radio traffic, a guy screamed, "I'm on fire, I'm bailing out. I'm hit, I'm going down." I'm going to talk about dead men. They were not all killed on the one mission. This guy commanded one of the other squadrons in our group. That's my squadron commander, Major Bruce Parcell. He was killed. Next to him is me. I wasn't killed. Next to me is Jim Pelletier, who was killed. Kelly was killed. Mike O'Regan survived. He was killed. That Capt is my best buddy, Ben Savage, who was killed. That's Jim Kuntz, who was killed. Of the recognizable people in that picture, 2 survived. This is something that people don't understand about the loss of life in World War II. Now, when my buddy, Ben Savage, this guy was killed, we were strafing a truck convoy. Anti-aircraft fire hit his plane, and it crashed and killed him. After we and the Germans left the area, the French people around there got his body out of the wreckage, wrapped him in an American flag, and buried him. 2 days later, the front lines had moved past there, so our flight surgeon, Doc Milligan, took a couple of guys in a Jeep, went down and dug him up and took him to the American cemetery at Normandy. That's my buddy Ben Savage. I took that picture 40 days after D-Day. There were 6,400 graves in there. They just nailed the dog tags on the crosses to identify the grave. When I took that picture, there were 6,400 graves. Right behind the tree line is Omaha Beach, where our soldiers landed D-Day morning. 5,000 Americans killed on that beach in one day, June 6, 1944. Our freedom, our liberty is a very expensive proposition, both in treasure and in blood. He got hit by a 40-millimeter shell like that blew a hole big enough for him to stand up in, but he flew it back. My airplane got shot up on 13 different missions. That's the first time. This is the elevator back in the tail, the movable part that makes the plane go up and down. I got hit by a 20-millimeter anti-aircraft shell like that blew the hole in the tail. The hole is not the problem. The problem here was that big piece of metal blown down there acted as a giant trim tab. And the airplane kept trying to climb, and I had to fly it with both hands jammed against the stick to hold the nose down, part of the time with my foot on it, because 45 minutes of that was really worrisome. The worst I got hit, I'm coming back from a mission into the Ruhr Valley in Germany. I'm about 8,000 feet, and an 88-millimeter anti-aircraft shell blew up under the wing and rolled the plane. You've seen this is a 20-millimeter, an 88-millimeter is about that long. And when one of those things goes off near you, you sure know it. It blew up under the wing and rolled the plane. I got it righted just as the next one hit the engine cowling. It blew a cylinder and 2 cylinder heads off the engine, and the thing kept running for 40 minutes, long enough to get me behind the American lines, so when I crashed, I didn't get captured. We got back to the little town of Chalon-sur-Marne, a grass airfield east of Paris, where we intended to land and refuel. I put the landing gear handle down, and the right wheel dropped down and locked. I couldn't get it back up because there was no hydraulic pressure, which meant that I couldn't use the flaps to land, and there was no left landing gear at all. The first shell had jammed it in the wheel well. We had a controller down on the ground, a guy with a microphone sitting in a Jeep, and I called down and asked for permission to land, and that controller told me, "I don't want that wreck on my field. You go away from here and bail out, we'll come pick you up." I was scared to bail out and decided to land it anyway. I came in about 185 miles an hour and just set it down very gently on one wheel, held the wing up as long as I could. It dropped down, dug into the dirt, and spun the plane like that, and I never got a scratch. P-47 is the best fighter plane ever built as far as I'm concerned. That's an illustration of the size of the airplane. It was the biggest fighter of World War II. In that picture, I'm seated right there on the wing, and just look at the size of the nose. When you came in to land, if you made a straight-in approach to the airfield like airplanes do at our local airfields, and you're way back in that cockpit looking over that big nose, you couldn't see the airfield out there, much less see a runway. So you see pictures of World War II fighters coming in to land. They come in low and they're peeling up like that. They're not hot dogging. There are 2 reasons for that. One is that a fighter at low altitude and low speed is very vulnerable. So we wanted to come in real fast and then kill your speed and get on the ground quickly. If you cut the throttle and pull it in a tight climbing turn, that will kill your speed. So that's the way we did. We came in, cut the throttle, pull it up, immediately put your landing and flap handles down, and you're landing out of a circular pattern. About here, your landing gear's down. On the back side of the turn, your flaps are down, and you're looking out the side of the airplane, looking down the wing at the runway, and you just slide it sideways like that till you get close to the ground, kick it straight, and let it land. And it worked every time. That's what it took to keep a P-47 in operation in World War II, a 4-man crew assigned to each airplane. I'm the pilot that flies it. These guys don't fly. They are my ground crew. Sergeant Francis Jones was the crew chief. His mechanic was Sergeant John Icavetta. His armorer was Corporal Stan Stone, who took care of the guns, bombs, and ammunition. He did a perfect job. I never had a malfunction in any of the armament. But Stone was an interesting guy. He was from Brooklyn, the world's most accomplished griper. He complained and griped and bellyached about everything all the time. So one day he's under the wing working on that bomb shackle, making adjustments, had me up in the cockpit pulling the release for him, and a fighter came in and landed and parked next to our plane. The pilot, dressed in a sweaty old flying suit, got out and walked by, and he looked down and he looked down at Stone and he said, "How are things going, Corporal?" Well, Stone didn't look up. He just said, "Oh, they'd be all right, except there's some blankety blank 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 big shot coming in, and they had us cleaning things up around here all morning." And that pilot said, "I didn't expect any special attention." Both Stone and I look out at Major General Elwood P. Casada, commander of the 9th Tactical Air Force, under whose command our group flew. Stone recognized him. What could he do? He jumped up and saluted. And the general returned the salute, but he made an issue of it. He scowled at him and just leaned in and very slowly brought his hand up to his cap and held him there for a little bit, and then very slowly lowered his hand away and grinned at him and walked off. These guys were absolutely heroic. We could bring an airplane back all shot full of holes, and by morning, that thing is repaired and ready to go in first-class shape. And they weren't in a nice airport hangar. They're out in the boondocks with flashlights. They took great pride in their airplane, and that was their relationship with me. That was their airplane, and they allowed me to fly it for them. The exhaustion, the weariness, the tension is pretty evident in that picture. I had just returned from one of those filet gap missions when they took that picture, which is the reason I have my flight gear on. It was right about that time that General Casada was on our field, and we were bullshooting with him. And somebody said, "General, 8th Air Force pilots get to go home after 30, 35 missions. Most of us have already flown 50 missions. When are you going to let some of us go home?" And the general looked at him and said, "Lieutenant, we're prepared to replace every airplane 3 times and every pilot twice." That ended the conversation, at least on that subject. The general was there for several reasons. One was to tell us that we had been recommended for a presidential unit citation. That was for that filet gap mission. It turns out that we were the smallest outfit to destroy a whole German army. I guess it was an army. We just 36 P-47s in just 2 days, 2.5 days, we completely destroyed that German outfit. For that, we did get the presidential unit citation. Every pilot that flew those missions got an air medal or a distinguished flying cross. He was there also for other reasons. One was to award medals to 4 of our pilots, and one of them was my wingman. In a fighter squadron, 2 planes stay together to watch each other's tail. This guy was my wingman. His name was Boleslaw Kaczynski. Now clearly Boleslaw Kaczynski is no Irishman. He was a good Polish kid from Buffalo, New York. Clean, decent, smart, excellent pilot, and he got a medal. The general pinned the medal on his shirt, shook hands with him, said, "Congratulations, Lieutenant, thank you, and God bless you." He started to step to the next one, and he stopped and looked back, and he said, "Lieutenant, how old are you?" "I'm 19, sir." And the general nodded and started to step aside and looked back again and said, "Does your mother know you're over here?" We didn't call him Kaczynski, we called him Coach. There's a picture of Coach standing on the wing of his airplane, which he called the K-Kid. He was shot down and killed a couple of weeks after that picture was taken. Let me explain how it happened. It was a real hazy day with about 2/3 broken overcast. Major Jenkins is leading the mission, and he sent Coach and I down to skip bomb a small bridge, take it out. We had just dropped our bombs when somebody yelled "Bandits." Well, that's code word for enemy aircraft, and we both looked around, and there were, I don't know, 4 to 6 of them diving through the clouds coming at us. We turned into them, both of us. The leader of the Messerschmitts was coming so fast he couldn't come out of that dive fast enough to get his guns bearing on me. I couldn't get around quick enough to aim at him. We passed each other just like that, so close that I could see he was wearing a white uniform, about 50 feet apart. But Coach and the Messerschmitt wingman were farther out, and they came at each other head on like that, both of them firing. There are 11 of us up there watching this. Nobody knows for sure whether they blew each other up or collided. Whatever, they both ended up in a pile of trash on the ground. Now I want to talk about our country for just a minute. That's the way the P-47 Thunderbolt was built. This is the bubble top. The Razorback was about the same thing. That is a pretty complex structure. Just before America got in the war, that airplane did not exist. There were 2 men building airplanes up in Long Island. Alexander Seversky was the president. His design engineer was Alexander Kartvelny, Russian immigrants that came here after World War I and stayed because they wanted no part of communism. They were building a small plane, a racer on floats, also a small plane, a P-35, which was mostly used to train fighter pilots. General Hap Arnold said, "I need a new fighter. It's got to go higher than anything we have, go faster than anything we have, be more heavily armed and heavily armored, and it must have an air-cooled radial engine as opposed to the liquid-cooled engine like in a Spitfire or a Mustang." Those 2 men decided to see if they could build an airplane that would fill that order. From the time they began designing on this thing until they flew the prototype, the first one, was 9 months. And that's before computers. That was done with slide rules and tracing paper. Can you imagine designing and building that airplane in 9 months? Before the war was over, in just 3 years, they had built 16,400 of them. The airplane that America built the most of was the 4-engine B-24 bomber. We built 18,000 of those in this country. This country built 400,000 warplanes. That's twice as many as Germany, England, Russia, Japan, and Italy combined. If Hitler and Germany and Tojo and Japan had had any idea of the productive capacity of a free people unencumbered by a bureaucracy, they would never have picked on us. My last personal little story. We were strafing a truck convoy one day. Strafing is where you aim at your airplane and shoot at a ground target. That's a German truck. I'm shooting at the truck, pulled out of the dive and turned, and in my turn, I'm probably 150, 200 feet above the Germans down there, and saw one of those soldiers swing his rifle like that and felt a bullet hit. I wasn't bleeding, I didn't hurt anywhere, so I just kept shooting till my ammunition was gone. Got back and told my crew chief, Jones, I think I got hit. He said, yeah, you did. This bullet had come through the side of the airplane and was embedded in the side of my parachute about an inch behind my back. That's an interesting bullet. It's a copper jacket, 8mm, probably used by snipers. But what's interesting about it, it's made of aluminum. Bullets are supposed to be made of lead, you know. However, the Germans were having a hard time moving their supplies around because we were up there tearing up their trucks and trains all the time. So that's probably made out of a melted down, crashed airplane. You see pictures of anti-aircraft fire in the sky that look like black puffs of cotton up there. That ain't cotton. Each of those black puffs is either an 88mm shell or an even bigger 105mm exploding. When they explode, they break up into chunks of steel called shrapnel. This piece came through the side of my airplane, right there by my shoulder, and stopped right there in the instrument panel. It's interesting piece of shrapnel. It appears to have aluminum embedded in it. I knew they didn't make cannon shells out of aluminum, so I asked an artillery sergeant, what is that? He said, well, when that thing came through the side of your airplane, it was white hot. It just picked up aluminum as it went by. So I've got part of my airplane permanently enshrined in steel. I want to thank you folks for listening. It's a privilege to get to tell the story of the wonderful people that I flew with. Thank you.